Hello, today I will be talking about sokushinbutsu, a practice of self-mummification that was performed by ascetic monks from the 12th century all the way up to the 20th century. Let's start by going over Buddhist death practice today. There is no one uniform, proper way for a Buddhist to have their body disposed of. Most are cremated. It is encouraged for Buddhists to die in a peaceful environment, one where they can relax and be surrounded by good energy. Asceticism is a philosophy or a lifestyle. Encourages abstinence from pleasure. This can include drugs, drinking, sex, coffee even to some. Anything that is seen as a luxury or could be construed as pleasurable is not something that would be partaken in by someone who practices asceticism. So we still see asceticism today in the Catholic Church, in the nuns and the monks, and in the Catholic priesthood as well. There are still Buddhist monks who practice some elements of asceticism, as well as Hindu yogis. So asceticism is still around. It's not just as intense as it will get in the events that I'm going to describe. Part of the reason asceticism is practiced so widely in Buddhism is because the first Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, practiced asceticism for much of his lifetime until he sort of practiced a more moderated form in his old age. In medieval Japan, asceticism was taken to an extreme by some of these monks to the point where they believed that self-mutilation would help other people, like their spiritual sacrifice would help the people that they were trying to help. This was taken to an extreme in this practice of sokushinbutsu, the self-mummification practice. And it was thought that through the suffering and pain and struggle that these monks went through to try to achieve sokushinbutsu were really helping their communities with all the pain and suffering that they were going through. In exchange for that, they were highly honored. So these monks thought that through their suffering and through their pain and their sorrow, that they were doing good, and that they themselves would benefit as well, and their soul would reach enlightenment or a higher level of heaven after death through this very rigorous and painful process. So the process starts for the first 1,000 days with a tree-eating diet of buckwheat, millet, fruits, and seeds. And this was combined with really rigorous and strenuous exercise to try to just destroy any more fat that's left in the body, burn as many calories as possible. After this initial 1,000 days, this was followed by a much more restrictive version of this diet that was only tree bark, pine needles, seeds, and a tea that was made from tree sap that was incredibly toxic. It was a sap that was typically used to make lacquers for tables, and this tea caused vomiting, dehydration, and a whole host of other issues. All of this with the goal of attempting to remove as much fat and muscle mass from the body as possible. And once the second stage of sokushinbutsu had begun, instead of strenuous exercise, the monk trying to achieve the self-mummification would instead spend his time as motionless and still as possible in meditation, which would also contribute to reducing muscle mass on the body, making it easier to preserve rather than decompose. So this diet was the best diet to do for those trying to achieve sokushinbutsu because it absolutely destroyed any body fat and any muscle mass you had on your body. Especially the tea made out of tree sap, it would build up as toxin in the person's body, and bacteria and anything that was trying to help decompose the body, it would discourage it from eating the body because it was so full of poison that not even bugs and microbes would want to eat it and decompose it. So monks who lived in Yamagata in Japan were much more successful at this process than monks who lived in other regions. And one theory as to why is because these monks were encouraged to drink from the sacred spring on Udono Mountain. And years later, when this spring was tested, it was found to be full of arsenic. And not only is arsenic incredibly poisonous to the human body, it's a wonderful preservative and has been used as a preservative until we found out that it killed people. So they didn't even know it, and they were using one of the best human preservatives to cleanse their spirit and their soul from this sacred spring. After 5 years of this really horrible, painful lifestyle, the fragile, weak monk would eventually enter a tomb in the ground, which was only small enough for him to do the lotus position, and he would be sealed aside from an air hole with a bamboo straw in it, and he would be provided with a bell to indicate when he was still alive. And people would stand vigil and watch, listen for the bell, and when the bell stopped ringing, they would mark it, and then the tomb would be sealed for another 3 years. And at the end of those years, they would open up the tomb, and if the monk was mummified and preserved, they would take him and honor him. They would put him in a shrine. If the monk did not successfully complete sokushinbutsu and he decomposed, he would very respectfully have an exorcism performed over his body and be reburied, and unfortunately not held in the same honor as those who had completed the entire process of mummification. So many of the temples where these monks have their shrines are still available to visit today, including that of the last known monk to complete sokushinbutsu, called Tatsuryukai. And he entered his tomb after the ban of sokushinbutsu in 1877 by Emperor Meiji. He had begun the process before the ban was enacted, and he thought that he should finish it, so he decided to do it without alerting the authorities. So that was 1878, 1 year after the ban, he entered the tomb. Years later, his followers went out and they in secret opened his tomb to see, did he do it? Was he successful? And he was. But they couldn't put his body on display without publicly showing that they had broken the law. And the only way that they ultimately were able to put his body in a shrine like they thought he deserved was to lie about the year that he entered the tomb in the temple records. And Tatsuryukai is the last known monk to complete sokushinbutsu, but we really can't know how many tombs were buried and never opened because of the ban that Emperor Meiji enacted. Sokushinbutsu may not be practiced today, but the devotion and the love that these monks felt for their spirituality and their community remains to be awe-inspiring and humbling. When you think about the self-discipline it must have took for these monks to put themselves through the pain and suffering that they did to accomplish such a feat, it's nothing short of incredible.